Welcome back to Sex Crimes Defense Podcast with Chance and Jay. Chance Oberstein is a criminal defense attorney in California. I'm a media professional. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be used as legal advice. Chance, what are we talking about today?
Well, we're talking about Dandy Don Lemon, and we're talking about doing a overhead view and legal analysis of the federal criminal charges brought against this former CNN anchor related to his presence and coverage of an anti-ICE protest inside a church in St. Paul, Minnesota on January 18th, 2026, which really wasn't that long ago.
Right, here we are. We're in February. It's actually about a month later, which feels like a year later, given all that's happening every day, which is important because it's part of the context of why this happened and what's happening next.
True. I mean, here we are. Don Lemon was arrested by federal authorities and charged with federal civil rights violations connected to the protest that disrupted a church service opposing a pastor's role in U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, in other words, ICE activities. Lemon maintains that he was present solely as a journalist documenting the event and did not plan or facilitate the protest. But after his arrest in Los Angeles, he was released on his own reconnaissance by a federal judge. What do you think about that? I mean, initially, that's the context of this whole thing.
Well, I'm confused to some, if not most of it. I do have a couple opinions, and I think what I just said is kind of where a lot of us are. So I want to start with, what do we know about what he's being charged with?
Well, let me say this. He's being charged with two things: conspiracy to deprive civil rights, which is 18 U.S.C. Section 241, and violation of the FACE Act, which is 18 U.S.C. Section 248. These are federal crimes. And initially, I just want to note this because it's really interesting. Federal prosecutors initially sought warrants for him and others under these statutes, including these two charges I just spoke about, which prohibit interference with religious worship. However, these early attempts to secure warrants were rejected by a magistrate judge and an appellate court due to insufficient probable cause, which prosecutors eventually advanced. This is why prosecutors had to advance it in subsequent legal procedure with subsequent legal procedures, because they couldn't even get enough probable cause to satisfy an initial court or a review of that by an appellate court. So, when I ask you, what about this? I mean, if you can't even get it started, what is this all about? What significance does this have on us today? I mean, these are very specific federal charges. The conspiracy to deprive civil rights, let's say that one, is alleging that Lemon and others conspired to interfere with constitutional rights such as free exercise of religion or freedom of speech. And the second one, violation of the FACE Act, accuses Lemon of aiding or obstructing an individual's rights to religious freedom at a place of worship during the protest. Now, these are federal civil rights and religious interference offenses, distinct from traditional state crimes, and carry potential penalties, including imprisonment. So Lemon's defense asserts he was acting as a journalist, and he intends to contest the charges, as you've probably seen on the news and his response just a couple of days ago. It just seems awfully strange that these types of crimes would be used on a journalist, don't you think?
Okay. So I'm going to say, it, as a lay person, I feel like we've gotten pretty legal pretty quickly, and I like that about this, but I want to step back for a second. In what happened, essentially, and as people, we've seeing coverage is the best way for us to gain our own objective insight, which I assume if there is a trial, their jurors are going to see actual footage, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as we've seen it already on the news, right? What exactly was going on in that church and what his role was. Yes.
Okay, so when I look at it, here's what I see. I see a journalist in a demonstration or in or around. I don't know his role per se, but he's seen as part of a demonstration or near a demonstration inside of a church. And this is actually where my first question is. Weren't they in church having regular worship?
Yes, they were.
Okay. And if they were in church having regular worship, how is that the time and place for a protest?
Okay, so they weren't protesting the fact that they were worshiping. They were
I agree. They weren't protesting that they were worshiping. I agree with you. They weren't protesting the worship, but they were there during a worship.
They were, and their protest had to do with one of the pastors' involvement in ICE. That was what this whole thing was about.
All right, and is there evidence and proof of that?
Oh yeah, oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was he preaching about ICE?
Well, I don't know about that because we didn't get that yet. We don't have that yet. We don't know. But what we do know is that he's a pastor on staff apparently, or he's the pastor. I can't remember which, but that was what this was all about. And the issue then becomes, well, how come it's not handled on a state level? I mean, why isn't this trespassing, or why didn't someone call, maybe the pastor or the staff, ask the state police, the local police, to come and get involved, and if they weren't welcome there, to escort them out, ask them to leave if they refused to leave in the first place. How do we graduate to these very, very very serious charges?
And I'm with you there. So it's as if, like, okay, on the one hand, I'm not sure if during the worship was the time and place for a protest.
Well, I mean, you may be right.
As a juror, I actually don't agree with that.
Well, you may be right, but let's talk about what a juror is going to have to look at in order to decide whether this is a federal crime. I mean,
but that's the thing. I don't agree with the charges. I don't agree. I don't agree that they should have been there, and I also don't agree with federal charges. The truth is, everybody wants to get Don Lemon. I don't really know why everybody has an axe to grind against Don Lemon. Who cares? I don't know why. But that's this is an axe to grind with Don Lemon. And he knows it, and he should speak up about it.
Well, it is, but I think that it also reflects on the bigger picture of weaponizing the Department of Justice and or processing people for the purpose of punishment. And that's the two themes I'm taking from it. But let's break it down a little bit. Let's take a look at this for a minute. I mean, we're talking about conspiracy against rights. Okay, that's the first charge. And to prove this offense, the government must show an agreement between two or more persons to interfere with constitutional rights. No overt act is required beyond the agreement itself. Specific intent to willfully interfere with the rights secured by the Constitution or federal law. Purpose to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate the victim, impairing their ability to exercise those rights. Now, from the footage I've seen, it doesn't look like that. It looks like Don Lemon interviewed a couple of folks. Nobody looked like, at least from my vantage point, looking at the footage, that he was interfering. He certainly wasn't, in my mind, when I look at that, unless I've missed something, he wasn't trying to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate the victim, impairing their ability to exercise those rights, because these people were freely speaking to him and being interviewed, and he was acting in the role of a journalist. He was documenting what was going on and getting people's impressions of what were going on. He wasn't part of the protest per se. What do you think?
Well, and I agree with that. And I think that it's an overreach. They're grinding the axe too hard, because it's an overreach to say that he is responsible for what the other protesters were doing. We can clearly see that he's trying to interview the pastor. Again, I don't know why you're interviewing a pastor during a protest, during worship. The whole thing's really weird. But saying that you can go after him for obstructing civil rights, the whole thing's bizarre. It's a screenplay.
Well, it's interesting, that, especially the second one, which gets even deeper into this whole idea of interference, which is freedom to access. It's Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. Now that may sound odd to you. They call it FACE, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. To establish a violation under FACE, the government must demonstrate use or attempted use of force, threat of force, or physical obstruction, not mere speech, intentional injury, intimidation, or interference with persons exercising protected activities, and that the interference targeted legally protected activities such as religious worship at a place of worship. Peaceful protest without force or obstruction typically does not constitute a FACE violation, yet they are being charged, or he is being charged, with that violation as well. Heavy-handed. When you look at it again, and I'll take two steps back, and I'll say to I'll say to you, and I say to myself, why? Why? If there's problems in a church that can be resolved at a local level, why is there federal intervention here? Why is it necessary to do that?
Well, it's not, but what we've learned is, and as a country, we've learned this. It's not like I've had to read more books than the average person. We've learned that the administration has targeted political enemies, and there doesn't seem to be a boundary on this. And since they can pardon whoever they want, they also just lump whatever charges they want on whoever they want. I mean, that's to me, that's what this is. This is another example of an administration run amok that has no boundaries with its own Justice Department. I mean, in fact, the three branches are hardly separated. And that might be a wild thing to say, but I'm pretty sure that's the passion behind why this even happened.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, and when I think about it, I think about it in terms of law. What are the key legal concepts? What are we really looking for? Why the federal intervention? Was it necessary? When I look at the key legal concepts, I'm looking for willfulness, specific intent. The government must prove intentional interference with rights. That's a higher standard than just accidental conduct, just something that happens accidentally or incidentally or collaterally to what you're doing as a journalist in your role as a journalist. 2, protected rights. The rights targeted must be clearly established constitutional or federal rights, such as freedom of religion or speech. Well, yeah, they're there. They're there. The question is, were they willfully interfered with? And 3, force versus speech. Purely expressive or peaceful conduct without force or obstruction is generally not criminal under these statutes. And here is where the evidence lies, as far as I can see, when I actually look at the footage of what was going on here. It looks like they were there. They weren't obstructing. They certainly weren't interfering. And he just focusing on him. He was documenting. But let's just say that there was some kind of, interference, or there was some kind of obstruction. I would imagine that being asked to leave and refusing to leave would get you at least local police intervention, which would clear the problem up. And so here's the dilemma. The dilemma then takes us really out of the common interference or obstruction, types of things that happen locally, and into the First Amendment protections that all of us, you and I and everybody else, love and cherish, because it's one of the basic founding blocks of this experiment we call freedom. What do we do with that?
Well, that's the thing. It's that you talk like we have old America still in place. And we now have a new America where the new America, nobody asks any questions. They just do whatever they want. And then they apologize later. We've all heard that it's a concept. Go ahead and do something now and apologize later. In fact, I don't even think they apologize. They just get slapped on the hand or whatever. It doesn't matter. But so it's not about what happens in the court. It's just about getting the headlines, getting the charges, and it's all about labeling, doxing, and all these other things that really have nothing to do with actual freedom.
Well, they have everything to do with social media and marketing and everything else, but there's also processing. But, think about it this way. Journalists in the United States enjoy First Amendment protections for news gathering and reporting on public interest matters, including protest and government activities. These protections encompass, and this isn't old America, this is America, freedom of the press to collect and disseminate information without government interference, okay? Underline government interference. And 2, the right to be present in public spaces where lawful activities occur. I mean, it doesn't get clearer than that. Legal and press freedom organizations emphasize that journalism is not a crime and that reporting on protest is protected activity. I think all of us agree with that. Otherwise, how would we know what's going on?
So
how would we be able to discern what is truth without at least being able to access a point of view, an objective reporting, whatever? How do we do that?
I don't think we all agree on the definition of freedom of speech anymore. Actually, part of me feels like what we're doing right now will be viewed as some as, they're like some use a word like seditious, and that's crazy. And I think that's why Don was in that room. Like, I don't agree. I want to make it clear. I don't really agree with what happened that day, but I understand why it happened. Because we're being shut out of what was an old America idea of freedom of speech, venue, and rights. That's hilarious that he's depriving civil rights. That is hilarious because we as Americans are being deprived civil rights all the time and nobody blinks an eye.
Well, that's
an extreme statement.
Well, that's an extreme statement. But historically, journalists have rarely been charged under federal civil rights laws for covering protests. Charges typically target participants, not observers or reporters. And that's my point. Why are we processing him? I mean,
because we don't like Don Lemon. That's the problem.
Well, someone doesn't like Don Lemon.
Many people. But you know what? It's not just somebody. And I think that's the new America. That's how new America works. Is if enough people don't like somebody, you can do whatever you want.
Well, so here we are. There's the Constitution that says that we have the freedom of speech. It's a First Amendment building block. It's there. It's set in the Constitution. And then we have what you call today, which is, I don't like you, you're my target, or you're canceled, or whatever, okay? I mean, we crucify people through social media. All the newspapers are dropping like flies, and social media is out there, and it's a place where people can hide and shoot without being seen. And we crucify people because there's no accountability, But we're coming down to our institutions doing the same with no accountability. It's really a reflection. What you're saying, it really is reflecting what everybody's doing to each other in the first place, right?
And we can also, when I see, I was stunned. I think it was about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, but I believe it was 2026. There was an article about lawyers that were speaking out against what was happening, what they were originally hired to do. I can't quote exactly. Do you know what I'm talking about? Did you see something like that?
No, I don't. So you're going to have to give me a little bit more idea.
I'll have to look for it. But what shocked me is, there's trouble when en masse several attorneys are speaking up about what they think is unjust. And we are seeing this. There is even the Department of Justice. Actually, I think it was because of what's happening lately with the hearings of Pam Bondi and I keep wanting to say Rocky Patel, but that's a cigar. What's his name? The FBI guy.
Yeah. The head of the FBI.
The head of the FBI. But anyways, that many FBI agents have been they've been biting their tongue because they're FBI agents. They don't want to speak, but they really, really want to say what they think, which is it's not good. We're seeing these institutions of integrity and power are being from the inside out. There's
now you're talking about really the broader implications of all this, because for public confidence in the DOJ is what you're really talking about, if there's even a Department of Justice today.
Right.
If there is, because a lot of critics fear political motivations may override legal norms, especially involving media figures where supporters view the DOJ's actions as affirming accountability for unlawful protest conduct, regardless of profession. There are two sides, there are two sides to this. One side is, hey, hold them responsible. They're doing this. This is wrong. It's illegal. The other side says, well, hey, they're reporting, they're documenting, they're giving us information. But regardless of that, the DOJ's legal rationale and court rulings will be pivotal in shaping the public trust. And right now, the public is losing trust in all our institutions, beginning with the DOJ. And that is really something. I mean, it is just something to behold. And, why am I talking about all this? I mean, I'm not a civil rights attorney. What's important about this? Well, something that Don Lemon said was really important about this, and that is that the process is the punishment. Well, that's not something he's saying that's new. If you know that you can't make the conviction, if you know that there's no way you're going to get over that hurdle, if you know it, but you go forward anyways, what you're doing is punishing the person for just doing what they do in order to stop them or make it very, very difficult for them to do it again, even if what they're doing is an important thing, a viable thing. You're trying to just cut them out. You're actually trying to counsel them by making them fear doing it again. For instance, Don Lemon would fear this kind of coverage again, so he won't do it because he was processed. He had to get an attorney, he had to pay money, he had to face perhaps prison and all the rest. I mean, what are you doing? You're just sticking a big chill into this whole idea of reporting, not just for him, not specifically deterring Don, but in general deterring all journalists, and in general deterring all pseudo-journalists and documenters of things that are going down in the United States that are real authoritarian right now. That's a problem because it's the process. You don't want to be arrested. You don't want to be charged with federal crimes. You certainly don't want your bones broken. You don't want to be thrown to the ground. You don't want to be smashed into a window or a wall, right? This is what's going on. How then should we look at our institutions? How should we measure them? What should we think? How much credibility are we going to give them when they come to court as maybe a judge or maybe a criminal defense attorney or maybe a jury, or maybe the general public? What are they thinking right now? What is going on in this country that's causing this wave of just insanity? What do you think?
Well, it's a lot, and I think that that's a correct read. And I think the broader problem is that you still have at least a quarter of the country that thinks that what's happening is proper. And that's pretty wild because, talking about institutions, I think they're still going after Letitia James and Comey. I mean, it's like, really, you're still trying? Why? Stop. Meanwhile, all the, January 6th rioters get a pardon. I mean, none of it makes any sense. There's no standard. So, I suppose there's still a good chunk of the country that thinks that Don Lemon needs to be imprisoned for life, and I mean, I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know why.
Well, interesting as it may be, and this is the other side, journalists maybe are starting to get a taste of what it's like to be accused of maybe a sex offense. Because even if you didn't do it, the process is the punishment. And if ultimately, you prove your innocence, because certainly it never happens the other way around, and you walk out to cancel culture, you walk out to, I'm totally cut off. I can't function. I lose my connections. I lose my business. I lose my friends, just because you were processed and the public caught hold of it. Now, I think that whole creation of that subculture of sex offenders and the whole idea of going after people for sex offenses springs back because the same processes, the same aggressiveness, and the same insanity goes, if it goes for them, it goes for us all. If we create subcultures, we all eventually are going to become a target of one thing or another.
Well, it just so happens, since this is the Sex Crimes Defense podcast, that I think this is a good time. I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but if you're a registered sex offender, the environment is ripe for change, because we've got, it just so happens, the most prolific sex offender of all time, the king, the big one, Jeffrey Epstein, who by the way, it's now in the news that maybe he was murdered.
Maybe he was.
And I mean, I've never had it as a maybe. I've always had it as a murdered. And while everything is crazy, and the president has more felons than people can count, felonies, we are in a really weird time. And somebody said to me, I don't think we should bring up Jeffrey Epstein. I'm like, this is the perfect time, because we are all so confused about what's reality, what's the law, what's real. We're all on the verge of being canceled in one way or another. People are saying and doing whatever they want, and the stigma's not working. The laws aren't working. I just saw another teacher got nailed. I think she was having sex with 2 students. Well, that actually... And which I think would be a good case, because I just want to say this. One of them was 17, one of them was 18, and they're going to be completely different charges. We got to do this case.
And here's the epicenter of the case is our country, and it's an American. And yet other countries are suffering its fate faster, quicker. It's people are resigning, people are dropping off like flies in government and in high positions, because they had some sort of connection to the Epstein case.
Oh, okay,
here in America, there's no accountability for that.
Okay, wait, that lawyer, there was a female lawyer just resigned for having like a little love note in the Epstein file. Dude, I don't even think she was on the island. Why is she resigning?
That's what I'm saying is
the guy.
There's a big fallout. The same thing I'm talking about in terms of cancel culture and, and this whole idea of someone being charged with a sex offense, convicted of a sex offense, whatever. That whole thing started a long time ago. But now everything's kind of like that. Okay, because just because you think that you're containing one aspect of society and you think you've got it zipped up, you don't. Okay, because at some point that Pandora box opens up, and that same zeal and that same idea aggressively spreads like a cancer everywhere. Yes, we are in total confusion. Yes, we are somewhat divided as a country. We are polarized. We really, really are. And that is how this whole experiment is going to implode. That is how it's going to happen. Because no one, as Lincoln said, no one can take us. Nobody. It's only going to happen if we ourselves divide and the house falls. And that is where we're at.
I think that's why Don Lemon was in the church that day.
Yep.
That's why I actually don't fault him. I think he was in there because nothing makes sense anymore. I don't think he can make sense of what happened to his career. What happened to his career? What? Because a president that's a felon said it's fake news? I mean, what happened to his career? And I will say this too. Listen, I know someone's going to say, oh, good, I got you, Jay. Listen, I'm not saying he was the best. And I don't have any allegiance to that network. But it is easier to listen to than Fox News. That network's impossible to listen to now. It is really it's like abusive propaganda. It's you got to turn it off, man.
There's
hurt your brain.
all these channels that do the same thing. I mean,
I agree.
They're all like mini me's, and even the channels that were in opposition are mixing things up to where you just, it's so freaking blurred. You can't make out one thing or another.
But there's
when you look at the news, I don't even think you can hear it anymore on these channels. You've got to read it and kind of read both sides and kind of bring it down to what you think the truth of it is on your own.
You do need to.
If you let someone tell you what the truth is, you're lost. I don't care where they come from.
But I'm just gonna say New York Post. I still go to New York Post for news, and it is so slanted. Oh my God, they can't even report something happening without insults and I can't. It's really hard to believe. But I know we're again. This is why I think Don Lemon did what he did. Because I think Don Lemon is trying. The guy's a journalist. Is Don Lemon a journalist?
Yeah, he's a journalist.
All right, he's a journalist. He uses digital journalism, meaning media and words and interviews. And I think the guy can't understand what's happened. Where did old America go? And so he went ahead, went in a church. I don't think he committed a federal crime. I think the federal crimes are reserved for the January 6th rioters that busted into the Capitol saying hang Pence. That's what a federal crime looks like. But what Don Lemon did, he's at the end of his rope like the rest of us.
But for what, for reporting on this protest, think about it. The overhead view. The crimes charged require proof of intent and participation in unlawful interference. Was he actually participating? Typically, journalistic activities such as filming or observing protests do not meet these elements. They just don't. However, prosecutors allege facts beyond mere reporting in this case, and the outcome will depend on legal defenses, evidentiary hearings, and potentially a trial. The process is the punishment. No matter what happens here, the time, the energy, the money, the anguish, right? The anxiety, all these things will play out, okay? And they're going to play out to Don's detriment.
I agree. And America learned this magic trick during the OJ trial.
Oh, they learned it long before that, but it was emphasized during that trial, okay, for sure.
And so let's just fast forward. Let's fast forward through the trial and all the testimony and the exhibits. What happens? The jury lets him go, right?
Right, but after what? Like sweating blood?
Okay, but Don Lemon is a journalist. This is one of the... Yes, after sweating blood, but this is one of the benefits one of the benefits of being an American and exercising your freedom of speech without breaking a law. I'll bet you Don Lemon can find a way to turn this into more journalism that actually, maybe him and the church is just chapter 1.
Maybe so. But Don's intelligent to know that it first starts with a great attorney. God bless him.
Yeah. It's funny you said, right? And so I will take this opportunity because I tell people, and I've said this to my kids, guys, we don't really understand what attorneys do. And we're kind of led to believe that they're not good. But over time, you come to realize they are your lifeline.
They are indeed. And in this situation, for sure, for certain and for sure, it's going to be a battle. Even though it looks like, well, there's not much there and, this shouldn't go forward. The process is the punishment. And he's going to need someone to saddle up, bring in the cavalry, man, because this is going to be quite the battle. It's all performance motivated, just like that Bondi conference the other day up on the hill. And we're going to see some fireworks. At the end of the day, when all the smoke clears, let's see where we are as Americans. Let's see where we are as America.
And as we watch the process, I'm glad you brought up Bondi, because when I think of hearings, even Patel, right? I can't think of his name. Even he, when he testified, everybody I've seen testify, that I've ever seen testify, is pretty much in line. Bondi, that is the most malicious talk during a hearing I've ever seen. She is clear. It's a good thing she runs the Department of Justice, because she is not playing by the rules. She is making them up.
Well, and the thing is that, as I said before, this takes away from the credibility of the Department of Justice. And if the Department of Justice has no credibility, it loses its best players. They resign. It never gets over the hurdles, even the probable cause hurdles, when it accuses people of things that just aren't there. Okay, it renders itself almost useless. And here's the funny part: if you've got a Congress that abdicates its powers, it just gives them away. Okay, and you've got a Supreme Court that enables, and you've got a Justice Department that weaponizes, and all of them act in unison. What you've done is you have just sliced and diced the credibility of the most powerful country in the world. You have sliced and diced it. You've made it a banana republic. And you know what? In essence, you have rendered your jobs useless. You have no more power or purpose. Once it comes to fruition, you all mean nothing. Nothing. If you don't take a stand, then nothing you've ever done in your life as an American, no position you hold, will be worth spit. And that is just a fact. And I don't think it's resonated yet, but we're getting there.
Well, and that's where maybe he is a genius, because Captain Chaos is accomplishing something I never thought possible.
Well, maybe in the end, Americans will value their freedom so much, they'll never want to ever lose it again. Who knows? Who knows?
Let's hope.
Yep. And pray.
You've been listening to Sex Crimes Defense Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us again. We'll see you on the next one.